In this video I will show you how to create an electricity bill for a high and low tariff system in Excel using the Visual Energy add-in. We will use the simple electricity bill created in video 19. The Visual Energy system periodically captures all energy data as tariff-independent time rows. Among other things, this has the advantage that you can assign a consumption value time later on. This time you can, for example, always calculate the consumption of a shift retrospectively at any time. We want to determine the monthly consumption for the high tariff, which should be active from 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening. To make things more complicated, this should only apply from Monday to Friday. At all other times, including the weekend, are to be considered low tariff times. Luckily, there is a matching Excel function to calculate the consumption of only a defined time of the day for the entire time range. With VE4 _calc_m_point tariff value, you can retrieve recurring time patterns and calculate values. Let us have a closer look at the parameters this function requires. We already know ID, OBIS, first date and last date from the examples included in the request for the simple electricity bill. We will now also include the daily start time and the duration of the tariff period. Furthermore, we will need two parameters to define the mathematical function. To do so, we add the fields tariff start and duration to the auxiliary information included in the table. This means that we have to enter 6 o'clock and 14 hours to set the time to 8 o'clock. Let us test this function and replace the previous simple function. The base function parameter defines how the individual values are summed up over the duration of 14 hours in our example. Here we enter 0 for addition. In the first step, the function determines the daily consumption values for the defined time range of the day. The next parameter, interval function, defines how the daily values are summed up. To calculate sums, we enter 0 again. In principle, the task would be completed now. However, we want to use this tariff only from Monday to Friday, but not on the weekend. This function alone is not enough, so we have to go a little further. The idea is to create a small auxiliary table with daily values and then only take the required days. To do so, I copy the start date and add one day in each of the rows below, but with the restriction that all days have to be in the same month. This way I can create an auxiliary table with 31 days while also incorporating months with 28 or 30 days. The corresponding function is if month G19 plus 1 is month $G$19, then add a day. Else enter 0, which corresponds to January 1900 as the date and thus no consumption. I then copy this to the rows below. In the column on the right, we will determine the weekday of the respective date. In Excel, there's the weekday function for this. As the type value, I select 2, which stands for numbers 1 for Monday through 7 for Sunday. Now, in the next column, we can first determine the total daily consumption using the tariff-independent VE4 underline calc and point sum function. With last date is first date plus 1, I automatically retrieve the day. Next, I determine the high tariff time. By deducting the high tariff from the total, we obtain the low tariff consumption. While copying the functions, we have to make sure that the parameters are always taken from the right cell. I log them with the $sign. The request may take a moment, as each individual function first needs to retrieve values from the energy database and then calculate them. Now, all we need to set up is the weekend restriction for days 6 and 7. For this purpose, I add an if-then function to my high tariff formula. If the day bigger is 6, then the high tariff is 0. Else, the function can retrieve the values. The rest is completed with simple Excel functions. We calculate the monthly sums and insert them in the electricity bill. If the tariffs also apply to reactive current, you can proceed the same way. I think we have provided a good example of how to retrieve consumption values for more complex time ranges.